The last aspect to this question about why does classical history matter is that there are dangers that come with knowing our past. We have paid in blood and misery for this legacy that we have kept unbroken, and it's important to understand that not all of it is good. It has brought us to the brink of destruction and very well may end our civilization as we know it. With this Western identity, we saw the destruction of colonialism and the brutality that came with that. We saw the unprecedented levels of violence that were World War I, which really was an extension of the Greek ideal of rationality applied to warfare. Clausewitzian theory brought true war and real war to be as close as humanly possible at the time, and the devastation left a generation dead on the fields of Verdun and Flanders. And it truly is a Western culmination of identity that brought that together. In World War II, we saw the world faced with utter annihilation. We saw the detonation of atomic weapons, which some scientists truly believed might light the atmosphere on fire, that by detonating this product of Western science, we might end the world. Fortunately, we didn't, but the fact of the matter is that we still do face the threat of nuclear annihilation, and that is the product of Western science and Western warfare. So that's a definite downside we need to be aware of. With this Western identity and this continuity with the past, we have seen deeply unfair gender roles. In ancient Greece, this separation of genders was almost uniformly deeply segregated. We saw women relegated to rearing children and housework, with some notable exceptions in Sparta, but Athens dominated the literary record, and Athens in many ways is about on par with modern Saudi Arabia in terms of women's rights. It's pretty bleak. But this ethos, we have to understand, wasn't truly broken until the last century. I mean, women weren't allowed to vote because, according to this Western ideal, voting comes with citizenship. And citizenship comes with civic service and military service. So according to the Greco-Roman ideals, if you don't fight, you don't vote. And women can't fight because that's what men do. So women were excluded from the political process. And it's important to note that that's hung over our heads for almost 2,000 years. And in many ways, we're still not fully free of it. We haven't had a woman be president. We're deeply underrepresented in government with women, and certainly the ideas about women in business, men staying at home, those types of things are still clouding our society. Stay-at-home dads frequently get looked at weird because that's not what guys are supposed to do, according to who? Well, the ancient Greco-Roman tradition. So, along with the denial of civic rights and the suspicion and hostility to those who deviate from gender roles, we see dangers in the larger models that we've attempted to follow. And what I mean by that is that our founding fathers sat down and they tried to create a government that would not use a king. And to do that, they really only had one place to look, and that was the Greco-Roman tradition. So they sat down and they looked at Athens and they looked at Rome and they looked at Sparta and they tried to create a government that would work. But it's important to remember that every single one of the models they looked at was a failure. No democracy, no republic had ever survived. They were all gone. They were all relics of the past. And our founding fathers breathed new life into these models and they attempted to patch it up as best they could, but their fixes were not tried. They were untested. They did their best, but we have no idea of knowing whether their solutions are lasting solutions. We see some severe problems with the ancient Greek and Roman models. If you look at Athens, the first democracy, we saw Athens being unable to make long-term choices. They made their decisions on the short term because the masses were fickle. We saw them abuse their allies in the Delian League for profit. We saw them blunder repeatedly in Sicily, where they lost massive amounts of their military force in this boondoggle because they had been talked into it. We saw the Peloponnesian War, where Athens could not back down from its losses. They could not make sense of what they had suffered other than complete victory, which was unattainable. So we saw in the long run that the democracy in its pure form has flaws. We saw with Rome an inability to keep itself out of civil war and tyranny. Political corruption grew beyond all the constraints, and it consumed the political process. We saw an inability to cross party lines, where Roman senators were shooting down bills they knew needed to be passed. They were good bills that would fix problems, and they shot it down because they wouldn't give the win to the other party. They would rather fight a civil war than let the other side get victory. That level of infighting ground the government to a halt and guaranteed change by violent means. When we look at our government, and the Democrats and the Republicans are more concerned with fighting each other than they are about passing good legislation, that's terrifying. And that should be setting off alarm bells, because that killed the Roman Republic. And we built our government on the Roman model. See the problem? We also saw in ancient Rome violence entering the political system. Once the general Marius held the Senate at knife point with hired thugs and gladiators, we saw violence become a tool of the political process. Well, truly it began with the Gracchi, but it spiraled into civil war. And once it was there, and once Sulla marched an army on Rome, there was never a point in Roman politics thereafter that violence wasn't part of the equation. If we allow violence to solve our political dilemmas, that might be the end of it. History says once that starts, free political process is done. So we need to be aware of these dangers in our past, because they might be the dangers in our present model. And we need to be very careful, because if we let those things happen again, that may be it. So there are dangers to our past, and to ignore them is dangerous in and of itself. We should know about ancient history because it is our history and it is our foundation, and we need to know what mistakes were made, because they can be our mistakes again. Next, I'll address the question about why does how we teach classical history matter. So stay tuned.